Hi, everyone, and welcome to God's Plan, Your Part, a podcast where our goal is to read the entire Bible in a year, seeking to understand God's plan of redemption while discovering daily and practically your part in it.
All right, we've made it to the end of another book. Today we are wrapping up Acts. We're reading Acts 27 and 28, and it is a lot about a shipwreck, a lot of detail about a shipwreck, and ultimately like the end of Paul's journey, kind of. He has now officially made it to Rome. He will spend some time in Rome, but his life will end in Rome.
So the journey on this boat is pretty significant in that Paul experiences a lot on the journey. The ship actually, it wrecks along the way. There's a lot of people on this ship, which I didn't really realize. I just kind of assume it's just like this small, very intimate group of people. But there are many people here experiencing this event all at the same time. So I'm sure there is just a lot of emotions, a lot of just craziness going on. But what is really cool is how God appears and speaks to Paul throughout this very uncertain time for him.
Yeah, I mean, we talked yesterday about how there's no question that God's sovereignty is at work here. Like, Paul definitely still has to be obedient, so he still has some level of responsibility in spreading the gospel. But Paul, in appealing to Caesar, that's why he's in the situation that he is. He has said that he invokes his right to appear before Caesar. In appealing to Caesar, he is now guaranteed a trip to Rome. But that's not just Paul's thing. Like, that is God's thing. And so we see here in these two chapters how God is protecting Paul, I believe, so that he can make it to Rome, where he's supposed to go, and ultimately share the gospel in Rome. And so one of the coolest things about chapter 27 is, it's chapter 27, verse 21. First of all, he says, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss." So that's not a great thing to say to make friends when you're on a ship, surrounded by this terrible storm. Yet now, this is verse 22, "Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of God to whom I belong, whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told.'" It kind of has a weird Jonah echo, because Jonah's on a ship and there's this huge storm and the people are freaking out. And Jonah's like, "The God who I serve is in charge of this situation." Paul's doing the same thing. Paul is much more faithful than Jonah was. If you want to hear about how terrible Jonah is, you can go back and listen to our episode on Jonah. But it's pretty cool how not only does God preserve Paul, because God definitely has a goal here for Paul to reach Rome, but he preserves, I think, these 276, I think that's the number, other people with him. And so they are protected because they are traveling with a servant of the Lord. And Paul, because he's Paul, uses this instance to witness to everybody. He's like, "The God who I serve is going to do what he says. Just watch."
I think it's interesting, too, what it says about faith, because when you compared it to Jonah specifically, so we have Paul, who is completely sold out. He has given over his entire life, his way to Damascus, on the road to Damascus. He has literally taken his entire life and flipped it upside down. And his journey on this boat, he doesn't care about his own life. His life is a reflection of who God is and what God's doing, and he doesn't care about himself. He cares about other people. Whereas it's so interesting with Jonah, because he was someone who cared more about himself and not the people around him. I think that speaks a lot to us too. How willing are we to live a life that is just completely open-handed when our thoughts and attitudes are not focused on ourselves so much as the people around us? And that's so evident here with what Paul's saying. He's like, "Hey, God's going to take care of us. I trust in him. I'm a prisoner here, and I'm telling you that it's going to be all right." He is reassuring the people that are taking him off to be charged. So I think that's really telling.
So I know you're excited to talk about these people in Malta, where they actually end up shipwrecked. I'm going to give you Bible nerd extra credit right before we get there. This book is written by Luke. Acts is kind of the second part of Luke. But one of the things that you can look at the Bible and believe that it is real and it is authentic is that there is actually a lot of geography in these last couple of chapters. and the way that Luke describes weather, the way that Luke describes these cities, the way that Luke describes how they travel, it all lines up with our understanding of the ancient world, where cities were, what were major ports, how the weather patterns worked, and where people would sail. So Luke is recording details that align with the history that we know about the ancient world at that time, and that's just one small way that we know we can trust the authority of the Bible.
So then we get into chapter 28. Super exciting. Mostly because it feels like I am thinking again back to just like this very mission-minded, walking into an area where you don't know anybody. People don't know who you are, what message you're bringing. It takes a lot of courage to just kind of approach people, but also it's really cool to see how this group of people that could have probably just taken them over and killed them is very hospitable. They actually think that Paul, it must be some kind of terrible, awful criminal, but quickly realize without much background at all that something is unique about this person. Something's unique about this man. He gets bitten by a snake, and they just assume, oh, he's just going to fall over dead. And Paul is unharmed. He is not affected by it at all whatsoever. And it's really cool how, I don't know, like God just worked that situation out to show that this man is unique.
So if you think back to, and this is a ways back, but the end of the Gospel of Mark, and we talked about this when we talked about Mark 16. Mark chapter 16, verse 18 says, actually I'll start in verse 17, "And these signs will accompany those who believe. In my name they will cast out demons, they will speak in new tongues, they will pick up serpents with their hands, and if they drink any deadly poison it will not hurt them." We've seen Paul do most of these things. The only thing we haven't seen him do is drink poison.
Right.
But like Paul does that. So, and this weird snake story is in some ways a fulfillment of Mark 16:18.
So I really appreciated this part because honestly, like as we're hearing how all this plays out, I think a first thought would be just like, oh my word, this is just another hurdle they have to get over. But God is using this weird pit stop as a way to comfort Paul, essentially share the gospel with the people of this island that might not have heard it otherwise, and really just give them like a safe haven. So I really appreciated that little, like I said, that little pit stop. I think it's kind of cool. I think I might have probably breezed over that in the past and not really realized the significance of it.
So finally, Paul does make his way to Rome. And one of the cool things about this is that the people that are in Rome are thrilled to meet Paul. The reason they're so excited to meet Paul is because they had received his letter probably about 3 to 4 years before. So they had never met him, but they were receiving instruction from him. So you see, like on his journey to Rome, the brothers are coming out to meet him. They're excited to meet him, to be encouraged by him. And what's cool about Paul, Rome has apparently, at least in Paul's circumstance, kind of this like loose house arrest that's not at all like we understand prison today. But so he is under the authority of the Romans. He is being detained in some sense, but he's able to visit with people. He's able to see people. He's under guard of one guard. But what happens in Rome is that he basically ends up holding like these Bible studies, essentially. There's just constantly people with Paul learning about Jesus, and Paul walks them through like I'll just read it. This is chapter 28, verse 23. It's the second part of 23. "From morning till evening, he expounded to them, testifying to the kingdom of God and trying to convince them about Jesus, both from the law of Moses and from the prophets. And some were convinced by what he said, but others disbelieved." This is very similar to what Jesus does with the group of people on the road to Emmaus. It's also very similar to what it says about Jesus in Matthew 28, where he appears and some believed, but some still doubted. So it's just really cool to see what Paul's doing. And it's really cool to see God in his sovereignty basically giving Paul an all expenses paid trip to Rome where he could spread the gospel in Rome. And I mean, if you're going to reach anywhere, you pretty much have to reach Rome at that point in time because all roads lead to Rome. Like we say that now, but like that was actually true then. And so Paul's taking advantage of the technology of the time, like roads that all lead to Rome. And when he successfully spreads the gospel in Rome, it's now successfully going to spread all over the place.
I also like the message that Paul brings as he is bringing the words of the prophet Isaiah out, where he is aware that there are some people that are not believing what he's saying. And he does say that they have ears to hear, but they'll never listen. They'll never understand. Their hearts have grown dull. Their ears can barely hear. So basically saying like this message is like nothing to them. However, I really do like, verse 28, where it says, "Therefore let it be known to you that this salvation of God has been sent to the Gentiles. They will listen." Like, that is so interesting. So he's kind of like, he's just like passing off the baton, saying, you all know it, take it or leave it. Mm-hmm. But there are like the Gentiles, they will hear it and they will believe. So I don't know. I feel like that just kind of uncovers another layer of believers that perhaps he's just like shedding light on that they're not really totally aware of.
So this is the end of Acts. We are throwing it in the books. We have now completed this one. For me, the your part is the entire book of Acts. The boldness of these, the boldness of these new believers is incredible, and they endure incredible hardship. The things that they have to say are very dramatic, very offensive, but they are committed to the message, and it's because of their faithfulness. I've said this before. It's because of their faithfulness, and ultimately because of Jesus and how they represent Jesus so well, that we are believers today, that we benefit from the message today. So I'm just encouraged to be bold in how I share. I know that it's not going to be received well all the time. That's not a license to be offensive. Mm-hmm. But I am like, I guess that's the big thing I noticed. One, the incredible things that the disciples of Jesus were able to do, and two, the boldness with which they shared. So I hope you're encouraged by that. I think that's your part. I mean, be bold, be courageous. That's almost biblical, I think. So we'll be back again tomorrow. Tomorrow we are going to start in Colossians, and really we'll just be going through a lot of these letters that Paul wrote in the latter part of his life. So we'll see you then. Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.